Some people in the commentariat have been hearing rumors about how the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union are in talks to figure out an off-ramp to the whole Ukraine situation, to figure out a way to negotiate a settlement. That seems to be the rumor, and it's coming from enough sources that you're like, probably, yeah, that's probably happening. And the Ukrainians themselves are kind of like getting very, very nervous all of a sudden, and so they probably heard such rumors as well, that the backers of the Kiev regime are basically saying, enough of this, okay? This is very interesting, and I think that some commentariat, or some people in the commentary community rather, who think that there will be a negotiated settlement are misreading the Russian position. Because ultimately, in any kind of ceasefire, you need the aggressor, the guy who's winning, to agree to the ceasefire. The Russians are never going to agree to any kind of ceasefire. No. They are not going to agree to any negotiated settlement. They might go along with negotiations for the sake of appearances. They might well just set their negotiating team, maybe even Sergei Lavrov. Maybe, Big Serge himself goes there and yaps away and like, yes, we should have like peace and all the rest of it. But don't be fooled. The Russians have made up their minds. Now, how do I know this? It was Dmitry Medvedev. He's the guy that clued me in. You see, Medvedev is he's an extremely judicious individual. In the West, a lot of people view him comically because also, he was for a time, for one period, the president of Russia when Vladimir Putin couldn't constitutionally run again for president. And, he was president for a term, and then he stepped back, and Putin returned to being president, and here we are. But you see, Medvedev has very good judgment, and he is a Russian nationalist. Now, do keep in mind, he's a Russian nationalist. He's not an ethno-nationalist. That's something that has to be, it might seem to be splitting hairs, but it's important to understand it. See, Medvedev, and Putin himself for that matter, they are Russian nationalists. They care about the Russian state and the Russian people, the heterogeneous, enormous population of Russia. The fact that Medvedev has come out so strong, points to something that Bismarck said, over 140 years ago, 150 years now. He said that the Russians are slow to harness, but quick to ride. It takes a long time to work up the Russians. But once they get worked up, and once they're on their way, they don't stop. They are not going to stop. In fact, I would argue that if Putin were to actually agree to any ceasefire, he'd be deposed. I mean, as simple as that. He's not going to. Okay, but I'm just saying hypothetically. Because you have to understand, in the West, we have personalized everything and said that it's Putin. Putin is the guy. He's the man who's driving this. And this is a colossal mistake. In no nation, in no society is one man the driving force of an entire war. It is an entire class of people in that society, the elite class, who drives forward a war. The Russian elites today, the people who are in the Kremlin, in the decision-making capacities in the Kremlin, the people who are in control of Russian industry and in control of Russian public opinion, all of them initially were nervous, no question. But after the victories at Mariupol, and seeing how the Russian army day after day is just slowly grinding away at the Donbass, they realized we're riding a winning horse. Do you quit halfway through a race when you're winning? Do you decide, oh yeah, I'm so far ahead of the others, I'm just going to stop and rest and take it easy and have a sandwich? Huh? No. The Russians are not going to rest until they have complete control of Ukraine. Complete control. If that means invading the whole country and taking it over with a Russian soldier at every street corner, they're going to do that. If that means that there is some military dictatorship that takes over in Kiev, and immediately pivots towards Russia and says, you know, Kremlin, Putin, all you guys there in Moscow, we are going to be your friends and vassals, and how do we make this right? Unless that happens, the Russians are going to conquer all of Ukraine. They are not going to rest. And any delusions in the West that there's going to be some sort of negotiated settlement, some sort of peace agreement, you have to understand the Russians don't trust the West because the West has lied to them so many times. And the Minsk II agreements was the watershed moment. The Minsk II agreements, for those of you who don't remember, it was a peace process that was signed in 2015 when the Russians were winning, and they stopped, negotiated the Minsk II agreements, and what happened after that? Nothing. None of the agreements that were negotiated at Minsk II were implemented for 8 years or 7 years. For 7 years, the Russians kept on insisting, we signed Minsk II, live up to Minsk II. They said it to the Ukrainians, they said it to the French, the Germans. So now the Russians will never believe any agreement that the West tries to make with them. They simply won't. And in any kind of contract, you need both parties to believe that the other is going to live up to the agreement. If you don't have that level of trust, of true belief that the other side will live up to it, then you're not going to sign it. It's going to mean nothing. And that's the problem with the Russians. They do not believe that any treaty that they sign with the West will be adhered to, will be honored, because the West hasn't honored the treaties of the past. They claimed that they would never grow NATO. They claimed that they would implement Minsk II, and lies, lies, lies. And the Russian people are sophisticated enough. I'm not talking about the intelligentsia or the leadership class. I'm talking the entire Russian people. You know, the people who are just middle class and up. They are sophisticated enough to understand what's going on, and they are sophisticated enough to understand the situation of how the West, went through a violent divorce with Russia, and now is trying to, weasel their way back into the good graces of Russia. They're not stupid. The people of Russia are not stupid. And that's why when I said earlier that if Putin tried to implement a peace policy, a ceasefire, he'd be deposed. Yeah. And not by Medvedev or Shoigu or Lavrov. No, the people would show up. The regular Joes, the Ivan Ivanovs would show up at the Kremlin and, string him up. Of course, they're never going to do that because he's never going to agree to any kind of peace proposal because he knows that the West lies. Everything that Vladimir Putin has been saying about the West, the Russian people are realizing it's true. The West lies all the time, by definition. Everything that they say, even hello, is a lie. And so you can't trust them, and so you can't make any deal with them. And if you can't make a deal with them, then the only way to get your way is by force. That's why there will be no peace agreement. This war is going to last until the Russians have it all.